This abandoned ship was discovered drifting thousands of miles from land, with dinner still on the table and no trace of the crew. What happened on board will leave you speechless. Don't miss the next mystery. Subscribe now. The Discovery. It was a gray, windless morning in the North Atlantic when the cargo vessel Aurora Maris altered its course toward a strange silhouette drifting on the horizon. At first, the crew thought it was just a derelict fishing boat, abandoned after a storm. But as the shape grew clearer through binoculars, something about it felt unsettling. The ship ahead was massive, far larger than any fishing trawler, yet it listed slightly to one side, its hull battered and streaked with rust. No flag flew from the mast, no name was painted across the stern. It was a vessel stripped of identity, gliding aimlessly across the open water like a lost soul. Captain Elias Brandt, a seasoned mariner who had seen his share of shipwrecks and maritime oddities, ordered the engines to half speed. "Keep a distance," he instructed his first mate. No signals, no movements on deck. They scanned the vessel through high-powered scopes. Not a single human figure could be seen, no crew, no passengers, no sign of life. The windows of the bridge were dark, and the lifeboat still hung in place, untouched. Whatever had happened, it had happened suddenly. The radio operator attempted standard maritime hails, broadcasting on all emergency frequencies. "Unidentified vessel, this is the Aurora Maris. Please respond." Static. "Unidentified vessel, state your condition." Still nothing. The empty ship gave no sign it even heard. The decision to approach was not taken lightly. Maritime law required them to investigate, but a ghost ship could be dangerous: diseases, damaged structures, or worse, pirates using it as bait. Yet curiosity outweighed caution. The closer they came, the stranger the details became. The hull bore scorch marks in places, as if something had burned against it from within. Several portholes were shattered. And along the starboard side, deep gouges in the metal suggested some massive force had scraped against it. The Aurora Maris circled slowly, studying the vessel from every angle. It was clear now that this was no fishing boat. This was an ocean liner, a luxury passenger ship, though weathered almost beyond recognition. The paint had peeled away, revealing corroded steel. Moss-like marine growth clung to the lower decks, as if the ship had been adrift for years, not days. Yet there were no barnacles in certain spots, suggesting recent movement. Captain Brandt knew what this meant: the ship hadn't been drifting for long. But then came the most disturbing discovery: there was food on the aft deck. A tray of plates, covered in mold, still sat on a dining table under a half-collapsed canopy. Cups of coffee, now cold and black, were fixed in place by dried sugar crystals. It was as if the passengers had been in the middle of breakfast before simply vanishing. By midday, the Aurora Maris had pulled close enough to send over a boarding team. They watched the ghost ship rock gently in the swell, its deck creaking as though it exhaled. The air around it carried a faint metallic tang, mixed with something older, decay, but faint and distant, like the scent of a long-sealed tomb. The crew members prepared themselves, ropes, radios, and flashlights in hand. As the small boarding craft moved toward the hull, a strange quiet descended over the sea. Even the usual cries of gulls were absent. The only sound was the lapping of waves against metal. When the first boarding officer climbed the ladder and stepped onto the deck, he froze. The wood beneath his boots was slick, not with seawater, but with something oily, black, and faintly iridescent. He bent to touch it, but Captain Brandt's voice cracked over the radio. "Don't touch anything. Not until we know what we're dealing with." And so, with a silent, foreboding tension, the investigation began. Boarding the vessel, first moments aboard the empty deck. The boarding team approached the derelict vessel slowly, their small motor launch cutting through the cold, gray waves. The ghostly silhouette of the ship loomed ahead, its hull streaked with rust and algae, its name barely legible beneath years of neglect. There was no movement, No waving crew, no gulls circling overhead, just the sound of the ocean slapping against steel. As the grappling hooks caught the railing, the first officer pulled himself up and over, landing on the deck with a dull thud. His boots scraped across layers of salt-crusted grime. The planks felt unnaturally cold beneath his feet, as if the ship had been sitting not just in the ocean, but in some other, far darker place. The rest of the boarding party climbed aboard in silence, each man instinctively lowering his voice as though entering a sacred or forbidden space. The air was thick and still, carrying only the faint scent of rust and oil. It was the kind of quiet that made every creak of the vessel seem amplified, each sound echoing far longer than it should. They spread out across the deck, checking for any sign of life. Doors to the crew's quarters stood ajar, swinging slightly with the motion of the waves, yet no one emerged. A forgotten mop lay across the planks, as if dropped mid-task. An overturned coffee mug rested near the railing, its contents long evaporated. Near the bow, the helmsman's station sat eerily intact. The wheel was still locked in position, and a pair of binoculars rested neatly on the console. But the compass spun lazily, as though caught in an unseen current of magnetic interference. One of the crew called out from the starboard side. There were scuff marks along the deck, irregular and chaotic, as if someone had been dragged or had run frantically before disappearing. But there were no footprints leading away. No sign of where they had gone. Every step deeper into the ship felt like moving backward through time. The sense of abandonment was total, yet recent, like the people aboard had only just vanished moments before the boarding team arrived. The captain's voice came through the radio, breaking the uneasy quiet. "Keep your eyes open. This isn't just an empty ship. Something happened here, and it might not be over." The men glanced at each other, their unease growing. The vessel was theirs to explore, but the emptiness pressing in from every side made it feel less like an investigation, and more like a trespass. Clues in the silence, strange evidence left behind. The deeper the team ventured into the vessel, the more unsettling the atmosphere became. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound, it felt weighted, almost physical, pressing against their eardrums. Each man's breathing and footsteps seemed unnaturally loud, as if the ship were amplifying every movement in mockery of the missing voices that should have filled the air. The first strange clue appeared in the mess hall. Plates of food sat untouched on the tables, meals mid-bite, utensils resting on the edges of plates as though the crew had simply stood up and walked away. Bread had hardened into brittle crusts, and the soup bowls were long dried, yet a faint scent of seasoning still lingered. It was a meal abandoned in a hurry, not the leftovers of a crew that had been at sea for weeks. In one corner, a chair lay on its side, its legs splintered as if knocked over violently. A deckhand crouched to examine it and noticed a small smear of something dark along the floorboards. At first glance it resembled oil, but the metallic tang in the air confirmed it was blood, dry, but still rich in color. The smear stopped abruptly, with no trail to suggest where the injured person had gone. Further along the passageway, they found a cabin that appeared locked from the inside. Forcing the door open revealed a small sleeping berth in perfect order, except for one detail: every mirror and reflective surface inside had been covered with cloth or turned to face the wall. Even the small porthole had been painted over from the inside. The act was deliberate, precise, and clearly not the work of a ship caught in a storm or in distress. The strangest find came in the communications room. The radio equipment was intact, yet the last log entry was dated only a few days earlier. The recorded transmission was brief, just a single sentence whispered in a trembling voice. "They're here." No coordinates. No explanation. Just those two words, before static swallowed the line. By now, the boarding party exchanged glances heavy with unspoken questions. Each clue deepened the mystery but offered no clear answers. The ship felt like a stage frozen mid-performance, the actors vanished, the script left incomplete. Whatever had happened aboard had occurred quickly, without warning, and perhaps without mercy. And the oppressive silence that enveloped them now seemed less like emptiness, and more like the watchful stillness of something waiting to return. Theories and suspicions, experts and conspiracies collide. By the time news of the discovery broke, the ghost ship had already ignited a storm of speculation. Television panels filled with maritime historians, oceanographers, and retired naval officers, each determined to explain, or exploit, the mystery. Theories multiplied overnight, ranging from plausible mechanical failure to outlandish supernatural intervention. Some experts insisted the ship had fallen victim to a sudden, catastrophic event, perhaps a toxic gas leak from deep within the cargo hold that incapacitated the crew instantly, forcing them to abandon ship in a panic. Others proposed piracy, though the absence of damage, looting, or distress calls made that unlikely. Maritime law enforcement pointed out that not a single lifeboat was missing, raising the unsettling question: if the crew had left, where had they gone? Paranormal enthusiasts were quick to seize on the more bizarre clues: the untouched meals, the sealed mirrors, and the final radio whisper. To them, this was a textbook example of a vessel caught in a time slip or dimensional rift, where reality itself briefly faltered. They cited historical cases like the Mary Celeste and the SS Arong Medan as proof that the seas hid more than just natural dangers. Then came the conspiracy theorists, weaving tales that stretched from shadowy government experiments to alien abductions. Some claimed the ship had been part of a classified maritime operation gone wrong, covered up until its unplanned reappearance. Others were convinced it had stumbled into an encounter with an unknown craft, extraterrestrial or otherwise, and that the crew had been taken for reasons beyond human understanding. Fueling the speculation were the leaked photographs from inside the vessel, the covered mirrors, the dried smear of blood, the dated radio log. Each image, instead of clarifying the truth, only served to deepen the mystery. Online forums became battlegrounds of interpretation, where grainy enlargements of shadows in the corners of the mess hall photo were claimed to be proof of something lurking aboard. Even the official investigation offered little reassurance. Statements from authorities were short and clinical, avoiding any hint of speculation. When pressed for answers, they simply stated that the ship was under review, and that more information would be released in due time. But to those already captivated by the mystery, this vague language was as good as a confession that something was being hidden. As the world debated, one thing became clear: the truth, whatever it was, had already taken on a life of its own. And with each passing day, the legend of the ghost ship grew, untethered from fact and anchored firmly in fear. The final transmission, the last chilling piece of the puzzle. It was only after weeks of investigation that the most unsettling discovery surfaced: an overlooked piece of evidence buried in the ship's radio logs. The crew's last transmission had been dismissed at first as a garbled, incomplete message, the kind of static-laced noise often caused by storms or faulty equipment. But when audio engineers from a private research group enhanced the recording, the true content sent chills through everyone who heard it. The voice was male, shaky, and urgent. His breathing was fast, as though he had been running. The words were fragmented, breaking through layers of interference. "They're here, watching us, can't see them, not alone." Then came the sound, an unnatural, low-frequency hum that no one could identify. It was unlike any marine engine or storm interference ever documented. The hum seemed to pulse, almost rhythmically, as though it were alive. Following the hum, there was a sudden, sharp metallic screech, as if something massive had scraped against the ship's hull. The man's voice returned briefly, this time in a whisper so soft it barely registered. "Tell them, don't let them find." And then, silence. Not a click, not static. Just absolute, oppressive silence. The recording ended abruptly, as though the power had been cut at its source. Experts tried to explain it away. Some said it was simply the panic of a crewman caught in a crisis, his words distorted by stress and failing equipment. Others claimed the strange hum could have been interference from deep-sea seismic activity. But a few refused to dismiss the more disturbing implications, that the crew had encountered something no human was meant to witness. For the families of the missing, the recording was a haunting reminder that their loved ones' final moments were filled with fear. For conspiracy theorists, it was the smoking gun they had been waiting for, proof that something unearthly had boarded that vessel. Online, the clip went viral, spliced into countless analysis videos where self-appointed experts slowed it down, reversed it, and filtered it in hopes of hearing something more. Some swore they could detect faint, overlapping whispers in the background, voices that weren't human. In the end, the transmission raised far more questions than it answered. It was the ghost ship's final legacy, a piece of audio that would be studied, feared, and obsessed over for decades. Whatever happened out there on the open sea, the truth was now adrift, forever lost somewhere between the static and the silence.